about the conversation between you two. The myth of silence during the war and after the war, the perspective of justice and what justice is. Yes, there was participation, there was resistance, even in everyday life in the ghettos. They had theaters, they had newspapers and music and like everyday life, cultural everyday life that was very important to them. But even afterwards, I understand you speak in the Jewish organizations and the Jewish perspective and the Jewish, I don't know, what they consider justice. I think for a Jewish joke, for every 2 Jews there are 3 opinions, but that's more to the point, the different perspectives of justice. And there was one very distinct after the war in the 1950s. Jewish survivors, scattered Europe to hunt for Nazis and to do and to do justice, to make justice. If you remember, Alba Kovner, the פעילות של נקם, trying to poison POW prisoners camp or entire populated cities. Like secrets of history, I don't know what you call it, but there was resistance even afterwards. But the main question is, and you, but I went to that, we keep going to the same rules, to law, the same organizations, and we keep playing the same game over and over. Is it because it's the only game in town? Or is it an attempt to save law? To save law, I'm not sorry for himself, but to get another perspective of law. If law can be different, instead of going to search for new legal concepts like the transitional justice. And also maybe an effort to save history, as the conference is using abuse of history. When we study history for justice, maybe something's lost in the matter of how we search history. But if you want to answer?
Let's open it for discussion.
Okay, and you want to...
No?
Okay, yeah, Patricia.
Just one small remark. I remember our yesterday's discussion when Laura was explaining whether these were Jews who had this idea of the law, or they did bring it from the Eastern Europe and so on. And now you said that you have this saying that when you have 2 Jews, you have at least 3 opinions. In Poland, we have this saying which says, if you have 2 lawyers, you have at least 3 opinions.
That's
This is something that came to my mind. And my question is to Olga, because also in my recent research, when I was just investigating the cooperation during the World War II concerning the preparation for the prosecution of crimes. And what I could see is that really the Jewish associations, different Jewish commissions, they wanted to be involved from the very beginning. And for example, there was a tension between Polish government and Jewish associations when there was this St. James conference, and Poland didn't distribute the letter which was sent by Jewish association due to the time constraints, according to the Polish government. But then I've read much information that Polish government used many documents prepared by the Jewish Association, that in Nuremberg, in its own trials. And my question would be whether you have any more information concerning this cooperation, whether it was really cooperation, or you could observe some kind of competition, tension, Also, not forgetting that in interwar period the Jewish-Polish relations were quite difficult, and we didn't have nice history of those relations, so this had to impact the whole approach.
Correct. Johan?
Thank you. I think that this session is especially important because till now we just focused on states, and you brought us back to bottom up. And I wanted to, I think, continue Patricia, but to ask Olga. I also want to flesh out more tensions between the Polish state and the Jewish. But I wanted first to ask you, which I found really interesting, you were trying to really map and give an understanding of what the historical commission was doing and what the legal commission was doing. And tell me if this is a huge oversimplification on my part, but it seems to me that the historical commission dealt more with the famous trials, the seven big trials of war criminals like Greiser, Goethe, all of these. And the legal commission moved to the everyday justice locally and so forth. And so they were actually much more involved with the question of Polish collaborators. Because these are the trials that take place there, and so there is much more opportunity for tension between the legal commission and the ordinary trials. So just on this division of labor, it's interesting, especially in our conference, because we keep on asking whether trials are done for justice or just for use and abuse of history or the historical narrative. And it's interesting that the historical Jewish Commission is about these high-top trials that are actually shaping the narrative of the war, and the legal commission goes to the everyday trials that usually are not discussed. So that's one thing. I think that I also read about tension with the Jewish community. That, for example, with the GATT trial, that the Jewish historians were given as expert testimony, were giving a narrative that was much more in line with the Polish narrative of the war, and there were criticism about that. So I wanted you to maybe flesh out more the tensions, and not just the really very interesting collaboration between the Polish, which is definitely not what is going on in Germany at the time. So.
Lina?
Okay, yeah, I'll join because I think it connects to the discussion of tensions. One is this commission, if I'm not mistaken, it was part of the Polish communist, new Polish communist regime. So I was wondering whether this communist presence did play a role in this discussion, and to what extent. A short comment, you were mentioning the legal matters and restitution and the getting hold of assets. So Chilik Weizmann has a book on that, I don't know. And also Camille Kirk addresses the tensions with the Jewish community, so I don't know if you know the books. If yes, great. And another completely, really question, I don't know. You have the citation of the goal of the commission to try Germans. Eventually they were trying Polish collaborators as well. So it is, of course, purely, well, we cannot say we're also trying local people, but that's the answer?
Should I respond? Okay. I'll try to go. So I'm not sure, Patricia, if you were asking about the wartime or the post-war or the both. Wartime. So the part of my research which goes to wartime is still in the developing. But what I see is from the wartime publications of Polish government in Great Britain that they play sort of a double game, and they need to show to the world that they care a lot about the crimes committed on Jews and that they care a lot about the Jewish victims, because this is important for how the Polish government in exile will be perceived and how it will be accepted to govern to the world. On the other hand, they have the Polish underground, which is not, on the other hand, they have a Polish underground which is not always happy if they pay too much attention to the Jewish problems, because we have our own problems. And this is certain this balance, and you can see it in the publications of the Soldiers Daily. There is a newspaper. They sort of include it, but then they marginalize it again, and it's something, I don't know yet how on the communication between the organizations it worked, but what I analyzed so far was the wartime press in different countries, and this is an interesting game of we cannot care too much, and we try to please many actors at the same time. So I think that might be the wartime game, which obviously after the war it stopped being useful because we know what happened. About the tensions. You asked a range of interesting questions. I don't have answers to all of them. Also connected to what Dina asked. I think, first of all, the Jewish organizations, they all acted in accordance with a newly developing communist regime, which was not that strict in the first years, and it allowed them to exist. And the Jewish committee consisted of representatives of many different parties, also Zionists, also some remnants of Bundists, and also the Jewish communists. At the moment that I'm talking about, they are still represented more or less equally. Nevertheless, what I see, it's a lot of self-censorship. What I see, it's a lot of cautiousness to what they say, how they say it, and I think they understand already then that if they criticize now the Polish government too much, or if they criticize, we see now from the perspective of today the conflict of victimhoods as it developed. In 1945, it was not yet clear that this conflict will be happening. So in 1945, it's just what everybody was talking about and what everybody was satisfied with is condemning Nazi crimes, condemning the crimes of the German perpetrators. You're right that the legal department, when it dealt with the crimes committed by the local collaborators, it was probably not that much publicized because this is the internal correspondence. And the Jewish, also, I think that there is no clear division of labor here. It's all really chaotic, spontaneous, it's a post-war years, it's crazy, nobody knows what's going on. Everybody writes letters, there is no internet. So you can feel this spontaneity, and they try to do what they can, they switch departments, etc. An impression that I have that the Historical Commission has more global view, because the Philip Friedman understood the mission and he understood the place of the commission and its work in the world. And he was planning this to become the background of the Holocaust research, which it did.
Yes.
The legal department was headed by one of the workers who is often in the correspondence is Wozebnik, and he's a prominent communist. And I feel that presence of communists in the legal department, you can feel much more. And what they do, they are sort of afraid to show too much Jewish autonomy. They don't want to show that the Jews do, I mean, honor courts were allowed to exist, it's okay. But we don't want to, this is the Polish government's role to do justice in this country because this is officially how it's supposed to be. And we are here only to provide evidence and pass it to the authorities. We are not the authorities ourselves. Because otherwise the Jewish community could be accused of, too much autonomy, too much nationalistic. This is, I don't have hard proof, but this is my impression so far from what I'm reading. Did I answer all the questions?
Yes.
Valeria? Valeria, would you care?
Hi. So if I understood correctly, it was the first question about how can we change the legal perspective in order to overcome these challenges in terms of state-centered processes. Is that right?
Okay, yeah.
Yes. No, if you want to rephrase it so that I can understand it better, it would be great because the sound was pretty bad.
The point was the relationship between justice, law, and history, and they almost never coincide. So that's the tension that I was thinking of. And when we say, okay, this is going to trial, and this is how justice looks, that's one. Second, this is how the Jewish justice looks. That's my issue or criticism or kind of thinking. You know, I think we're agreeing.
No, I just think that I don't agree with one point that you assume law is the same creature all over again, and why do we come back to law? And I think the whole point of this conference shows that law keeps on changing its meaning, and a lot of what we see here is completely new functions like expert testimonies, like different kind of evidence, like different kind of a relationship between the state and the victim community. So I just think that it is wrong to assume that law is a constant and that either we turn to law or we turn to the genes or whatever, but law is a floor, a platform that we keep on changing, and I think that Valeria's point is about the very different concept of law that we have today, and for example, the relationship between law and history has completely changed.
Just to clarify just a bit, my point was, why is it that we turn to law in the first place after it failed us so miserably?
Because it's not the same law.
No, that's okay. So it's a question about what law is or what law can be. So when we turn again to the law, the paradigm of law that failed us, is it also an attempt to save law and to make new law, a new concept of law? I'm not sure, I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
I think that's what they are trying to show.
I'm not sure.
So please
Respect.
answer.
So
Pardon? No, because I forgot. Do you, I mean,
Valeria.
No,
Valeria, yes.
yeah, so no, that in terms of the law, Leora in her scholarship and in her interventions makes something that hopefully it will be approached at some point, that is that international law at least is missing one actor, and that might also be at the core of the how law has been failing us so much. that is individuals and groups and communities. So we are trying to approach very intense episodes of violence only with states and at the maximum international organizations that are, as we were saying in the beginning, mostly the perpetrators, as the ones that need to sort out everything. But as we saw with Olia, but also with some presentations yesterday, individuals, communities, groups play a crucial role. So maybe, I think that law will always fail us because what we are failing is us as humanity engaged one time and again in episodes of massive violence. But what Leora says in her contributions is that there is this missing actor, and what we can see in the scholarship is that indeed this is the actor that is trying to at least push the law boundaries a little bit more and try to actually pursue justice or confront ongoing atrocities. So maybe we could aspire, using these historical-based studies, to change the law in order to have one more tool. Maybe it's not ideal, maybe it will not change anything, but if at the level of international law we could have more recognition of the role of victims' organizations, groups, individuals as visible actors to confront violence, we might have a better law that will maybe stop disappointing us so hardly.
Any questions? Okay, yeah. Anton?
Great question to Olga. I don't know, do I draw a correct presumption that the Jewish Historical Commission was sort of unique in the context of Europe, Eastern Europe? No. Okay. Then the second part of the question, can you, in that case, for example, compare and contrast the modus operandi of the Jewish Historical Commission in Poland and, for example, the Soviet Anti-Fascist Committee?
Okay, so can I respond? Just
Yes.
okay. It was not unique. That's definitely not true. And as we know from, for example, Laura Jovish's book, we have historical commissions all over Europe, and the efforts to compile and put together documents and diaries and memoirs all over. It was different because the system created in Poland for survivors after the war was really unique in Poland. It was different from other countries. It was a small amount of survivors, but even though they were not as numerous as before the war, they had all sorts of communal institutions in place. 10 political parties, a few theaters, schools, kindergartens, religious institutions. They created all the bureaucracy all over again, and it was allowed to exist independently for a few years. So that's, I think, is unique, and they had relative freedom to create what they wanted, self-censored in a way, but they had freedom. The Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee was very different in this regard. It did not exist in a relatively free environment, never in its time. It was created by Jews, but also by communists. It was created for a certain purpose. During the war, it had a dream, like a famous. They had a dream to represent the Jewish suffering, but it would never to happen. And they were aware of these limitations. They were just not aware of how far these limitations go. The book will never come out even. And the style is very different. The style of the writing is very different. How they formed the narrative is very different. The Polish Jews, they educated and they worked in the interwar period in Poland, which was very different from the interwar period in the Soviet Union. And they developed a different methodology, a different view on how history and how the history of Jewish persecution should be written.
Can you say something about the methodology? The different methodology? Just what you mean?
So the school of thought that was prevailing in Warsaw in the 1940s, this was related very much to Ringelblum. This was related very much to the Warsaw School of History, to the Salobaron, to Dubnov, to Ivo, to the
And this is
collection
not
of
the
diaries. This is European. I mean, this is European. It is connected to Eastern Europe, including the Soviet Union. But this connection was disrupted in my opinion, the Anti-Fascist Committee took upon themselves more of a journalistic style of Grossman and Ehrenburg, and this different way, interesting way, but it was very different from, I don't know, Dubnovian history, right? It was not history exactly, it was more of a journalism, documentary journalism, and also the Black Book is not a document, it's a feuilleton, just a very long one, on the basis of some documents.
Thank you.
We are finished.
Okay, so we're calling off the. We'll go for lunch now.
Yes, please.